we might say like, it's always so hard to turn off the TV, right? We're talking about it as if it's this sort of amorphous, like it's only about the television or it's only about the iPad. And we're missing the part of making it clear to our kids that, hey, this is a skill that you're working on. And we work on this skill in these different ways.
'Cause it's hard to be a person with a body these days when bonkers TikTok diets are all the rage. And why are the seats so damn small on the airplane? 'Cause it's hard to be a person with a body these days.
You're listening to Burnt Toast. I'm Virginia Soul-Smith. Today, my conversation is with Ash Brandin, who many of you are going to know better as the Gamer Educator on Instagram and Substack. They are also the author of a fantastic new book, Power On, Managing Screen Time to Benefit the Whole Family. I asked Ash to come back on the podcast because they are always the person I go to when I am feeling stressed about my kids and screen time in general. We talk a lot about how much our cultural anxiety about screen time parallels diet culture. And there's a lot of really powerful reframings in this episode that might blow your mind and make your parenting just a little bit easier. So definitely give this one a listen and share it with anyone in your life who's also struggling with kids and screen time. And don't forget that you can take 10% off a copy of Power On if you order it from the Burnt Toast Bookshop and also order Fat Talk or have bought Fat Talk from them in the past. The Burnt Toast Bookshop is hosted by my local independent bookstore, Split Rock Books, and you can click the link in your episode description or go to splitrockbks.com to find it. So here's Ash. So for anyone who missed your last episode, which of course I will link to in the transcript, can you just quickly tell us who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I'm Ash Brandin. I use they, them pronouns on Instagram and the internet. I go by the Gamer Educator. And I am a middle school teacher by day. And then on my online presence, I help families and caregivers better understand and manage all things technology, screen time, screens, and kind of reframe the way that we look at them as caregivers to find a balance between, freaking out about them and allowing total access and finding a way to make it work for us.
And we are here today to talk about your brilliant new book, which is called Power On, Managing Screen Time to Benefit the Whole Family. I can't underscore enough how much everybody needs a copy of this book. I have already turned back to it multiple times since reading it a few months ago. Just really helps ground us in so many aspects of this conversation that we don't usually have.
I'm so glad to hear that it's helpful. So my book is Power On, as you said, and the subtitle is Managing Screen Time to Benefit the Whole Family. And if people are new to who I am, I have sort of three central tenets of the work that I do. And one is that screen time is a social inequity issue. The second is that screens can be part of our lives without being the center of our lives. And the third is that screens and screen time should benefit whole families. And I think especially in the last year to 2 years, we have seen a lot of the trend toward the panic around technology and screens and smartphones and social media. And I think that there are many reasons to be concerned around technology and its influence, especially with kids. But what's missing in a lot of those conversations is a sense of empowerment and what families can reasonably do. When we focus solely on the fear, it ends up just putting caregivers in a place of feeling bad.
Yeah, you feel like you're getting it wrong all the time.
Shame isn't empowering, right? No one is like, well, I feel terrible about myself, so now I feel equipped to go make a change, right? That's missing in so many of those conversations and other books and things that have come out because it's way harder. It's so much harder to talk about what you can really do and reasonably control in a sustainable way. It's much simpler to just be like, oh, yeah, and that's technology's fault, and this is, and that other thing, too. So, I'm an educator, and I really firmly believe that if anyone's in this sort of advice-type space, be it online or elsewhere, that they need to be trying to empower and help families instead of just capitalizing on fear. And as someone who also does longer form writing and also shorter form on the internet, short form content online, you cannot put a lot of nuance in that. It's really, really hard. And it's often missing. So being able to add that in and really dive deeply into these topics to explore them so that caregivers can walk away going, oh, okay, like I can maybe actually make a change or put something in place that will actually work for us. And if not, I know what I could also try. That really appealed to me, just trying to help more people and reach them where they're at.
I mean, this book is so helpful. There are like checklists upon checklists of things you can try, like tweaks to make, and it's incredibly useful. You know, what I really found most powerful is that you really give us permission to say, well, what need is screen time meeting right now? And that is not what we usually get to do. And particularly, you say, like, this includes caregivers' needs. Like, not just what need is this meeting for the kid, but what need is this meeting for me? I am here recording with you right now because iPads are meeting the need of children have a day off school on a day when I need to work. We won't be interrupted unless I have to approve a screen time request, which I might in 20 minutes. But that was a really helpful reframing for me personally. I got divorced a couple years ago, so now my kids move back and forth between two homes, which each only have one adult in it, and screen time increased when that happened because there's one caregiver in each house and two kids.
Right.
And giving myself permission to recognize that I have needs really got me through a lot of adjusting to this new rhythm of our family.
Absolutely. And when we're thinking about what the need is, that means it's going to change. I think there's a lot of parenting, whatever aspect of parenting you want to talk about, where it feels like, okay, we have to come up with the set of rules and they have to like work for everything in perpetuity without adjustment. And it also kind of sets us up for a sense of failure. If we're like, well, I had this magical plan that someone told me was going to work and it didn't. And so I must be the problem, right? It all comes back to that, like, well, it's my fault place.
Oh, it screens as diet culture all over again.
All over again. We're back at it. And it's just not helpful. And if instead we're thinking about like, well, what is my need right now? As you said, that's a big part toward the end of the book of really creating a system and a framework of thinking about, okay, what is it I actually need this for? And sometimes it's I have to work. And sometimes it's my kid is sick and they just need to relax. And sometimes it's, as you were alluding to earlier, it's like we've all just had a day, right? Like we've been run ragged and we just kind of need a break. And that need is going to dictate very different things, right? If my kid is laid up on the couch and throwing up, then what screen time is going to be doing for them is very different than if I'm trying to work and I want them to be like reasonably, engaged in content and trying to maybe learn something. And that's fine. And being able to center that as, well, this is what I need right now, or this is what we need right now, just puts us in a place of, again, feeling like we're making it work for us instead of feeling like we're always coming up against some rule that we're not going to quite live up to.
And I'd love to talk about the inequity piece a little more too, because as I said, going from a two-parent household to a one-parent household, still a highly privileged environment. But just that small shift, I was like, oh, wait a second. I think all the screen time guidance is just for like typical American nuclear families with ideally a stay-at-home parent. So can you talk about why so much of the standard guidance doesn't apply to most of our families?
Oh, yes. I think that's such a good point, too, because it's not even just a stay-at-home parent. It's like kind of assuming that there is always at least one caregiver who is fully able to be present. Oh, so now, quote unquote, mom, default parent is making dinner and dad is relaxing after work and is monitoring what the kids are doing, right? And it's one of those times where I'm like, have you met a family?
Right. Like, people are in 7 different places at once. Like, it's just not that simple.
It's not that simple, right? It's like, have you spent 5 minutes in a typical household in the last 10 years? This is not how it's going, right? So the beginning of the book is really helping people kind of unlearn and relearn what we may have heard around screens, including what research really does or doesn't say around screens, and this idea of the social piece, the social inequity piece. Because especially since the onset of COVID, screens really are filling in systemic gaps for the vast majority of families. I'm a family with 2 caregivers in the home and we both work, but we're both very present caregivers. So we're definitely among, kind of a rarity of that we're very privileged. We're both around a lot of the time. And we still are using screens to meet some of those gaps. So whether it's, we don't really have a backyard, for example, or people are in a neighborhood where they can't send their kids outside, or they don't have a park or a playground. They don't have kids in the neighborhood, or it's not a safe climate, or you live in an apartment and you can't have your neighbors complain for the fifth time that your kids are stomping around and being loud, whatever it is, a lack of daycare, affordable aftercare, those are all gaps. They all have to be filled. And we used to have different ways of filling those gaps, and they've kind of slowly become less accessible or less available. And so something has to fill them. And so what ends up often filling them is screens. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily a good thing. Like, I'd rather live in a world in which everyone is having their needs met accessibly and equitably. But, that's a much harder conversation and is one that we don't have very much say in. We participate in that and we might vote for certain people, but that's about all we can really do reasonably. So in the meantime, we have to fill that in with something. And so screens are often going to fill that in. And especially if you look at caregivers who have less privilege, who are maybe single caregivers, caregivers of color, people living in poverty, all of those aspects of scarcity in terms of their capacity, like the bandwidth and their capacity as a caregiver is less and spread thinner. And all of that takes away from a caregiver's ability to be present. And that's something that comes up in the book. Is there's some really interesting studies that were done in that area around just the way that having less capacity affects you as a caregiver. And when I saw that, I thought, well, of course people are turning to screens because they have nothing else to give from. And when we think of it that way, it's hard to see that as some sort of personal failure, right? When we see it instead as, oh, this is out of necessity, then again, it puts it in a place of how do I make it work for me, as opposed to I'm bad for using it.
Right. How do I use screen time to meet these needs and to hopefully build up my capacity so that I can be more present with my kids? I think people think if you're using a lot of screens, you're really never present. That's stereotype of the parent on the playground staring at their phone instead of watching the kid play, when it's well, the reason we're at the playground is so the kid can play. And I can maybe answer some work emails.
100%.
It doesn't mean I'm not present at other points of the day.
Right. And of course, it's well, that's a snapshot of a day, right?
Yeah.
And you're seeing one moment. Yes, I find that so frustrating, where it's people just can't win. It just really feels like you cannot win. Where it's if I were sitting there staring at my child's every move in the park, someone would be like, you're being a helicopter, right? And if I look at my phone because I'm trying to make the grocery pickup order because I would rather my child have time at the playground than we spend our only free hour in the grocery store, and I'm having to manage a kid in the grocery store and not have fun together, right?
Yeah.
If instead I'm placing a pickup order and they're getting to run around on the playground, now also somehow I'm failing because I'm looking at my phone instead of my kid. But also we want kids to have independent time and not need constant input and not constantly be told you're doing great, right? It's it just really feels like you just can't win sometimes. And being able to take a step back and really focus on what, like you said, what need is this meeting? And if it's ours, and if it is helping me be more present and connected, that's a win. When I make dinner in the evening, my kid is often having screen time, and I will put in an AirPod and listen to a podcast, often burnt toast or something else. And that's my decompression, right? Because I come home straight from work and other things. I'm not having time to really decompress.
Right. You need that airlock time where you can decompress and then be ready to be present at dinner.
Exactly.
I'm sure I've told you this before, but I reported a piece on screen time for Parents Magazine probably almost 10 years ago at this point. I think my older child was 3 or 4. And I interviewed this Harvard researcher, this older white man. And I gave him the dinner time example. I said, I'm cooking dinner. My kid's watching Peppa Pig so that I can cook dinner and take a breath, and then we eat dinner together. And he said, why don't you involve her in cooking dinner? Why don't you give her a bag of flour to play with while you cook dinner?
Of all the things.
And I said to him, because it's 5 p.m. on a Wednesday, and who's coming to clean the flour off the ceiling?
Right.
What's
a
wrong
bag
with
of
you, sir?
flour? Of all the things to go to, that's the most.
He was kids love to make a happy mess in the kitchen. I was I don't love that.
Oh my God.
And it was just exactly that. My need didn't matter to him at all. He was oh, well, if you just want to pacify your children. I was I do, yes, in that moment.
Well, and I think that's another part of it is that, someone says it to us like that, and we're like, well, I can't say yes, right?
Yeah.
I can't be like, yes, sir, I do.
Yes.
But in the moment, yeah, there are times where it's like, I need you to be quiet. And I mean, as hard as this can be to think sometimes, it's like, right now, I need you to be quiet and convenient because of the situation we're in, right?
Yes.
And that doesn't mean we're constantly expecting that of them. And hopefully that's not something we're doing all the time. But if the need is, oh my God, we're all melting down. And if we don't eat in the next 15 minutes, we're going to have a 2-hour, DEFCON 1 like emergency on our hands, then I'm going to throw Peppa Pig on so that we can all become better regulated humans in the next 15 minutes and not have a hangry meltdown. That sounds like a much better alternative to me.
Than flour all over my kitchen on a Wednesday. Right. I mean, I'll never not be mad about it. It's truly the worst parenting advice I've ever received. So I think just giving us all more space as caregivers to be able to articulate our own needs, articulate what we need to be present, makes a ton of sense. And really, as you're saying, it's like what we can do in the face of this larger like gaps in the care system that leave us holding so much. That said, I think there are some like nitty-gritty aspects of this that we all struggle with. So I want to talk about some of the nuts and bolts pieces. One of my biggest struggles is still the question of how much time is too much time. And this is where your book really helped me because you argue that time really isn't the measure we should be using. As you're saying, that need is going to vary day to day. And all the guidance that's been telling us like 30 minutes at this age, an hour at this age, all of that is not particularly germane to our lives. So can you explain both why time is less what we should fixate on and then like how do I release myself?
How do you release yourself?
How do I divest from the screen time diet culture? That's my question.
Oh, man. I wish I had a magic bullet for that one. We'll see what I can do. When I was writing it and thinking about it and making content about it, I kept thinking about you because one of the things that comes up around the original kind of time guidelines that everyone speaks back to, they're from the AAP, and they have not actually been used in about 10 years, but people still bring them up all the time, this sort of like no time under 2 and like up to an hour up to age 5 and 1 to 2 hours, 5 to 12. And if you really dig in, I was following footnote after footnote for a while, trying to really find where did this actually come from? It's not based on, some study that found that that's the ideal amount of time. It really came from a desire to find this sort of middle ground of time spent being physically idle. And there was a big incorporation of wanting to avoid childhood obesity.
Of course.
Yeah. It all comes back, right?
I should have guessed it.
And so in their original recommendations, the AAP note that partially this is to, encourage a balance with physical movement, which of course assumes that if you are not sitting watching TV or using an iPad, that you will be playing volleyball or something.
You will automatically be outside.
Right, exactly.
Running around.
Of course, because those are the only options, right?
It also assumes that all screen time is not physical, which is also not. A lot of kids are very physical when they're watching screens.
Exactly. And it, of course, immediately also imposes a morality of one of these things is better. Moving your body is always better than a screen, which is not always going to be true, right? All these things have nuance in them. But I thought that was so interesting and it shouldn't have surprised me. And yet somehow it still did when I saw that and went, oh, of course these are related. And of course it is good to find movement that is helpful for you and to give your kids an enjoyment of being outside or moving their bodies or playing a sport. Like that is a good thing. And putting that in opposition to something else they may enjoy, like a screen, really quickly goes to that diet culture piece of like, well, how many minutes have you been doing that? Because now we have to offset it with however many minutes you should be, right, running laps or whatever. So those original recommendations are coming from a place of already trying to kind of mitigate the sort of negatives of sitting and doing something sort of passively leisurely. And In the last 10 years, they've moved away from that, and they now recommend what's called making a family media plan, which actually I think is way better because it is much more prioritizing, like, what are you using this for? And can you be doing it together? And what can you do, afterward? It's much more reasonable, I think, but many people still go back to those original recommendations because, like you said, it's a number. It's simple. It's just tell me how.
We love to grab onto a number and grade ourselves.
Right. Just tell me how much time so that I can tell myself I'm doing a good job. Right. But, time is just one piece of information, and it can be so specific with, what am I using that time to do? If I'm sitting on my computer and doing work for an hour and a half, technically that is screen time, but it is going to affect me a lot differently than if I'm watching Netflix or scrolling my phone for an hour and a half. I will feel very different after those things. And I think it's really important to be aware of that and to make our kids aware of that from an early age so that they are thinking about more than just, it's been X amount of minutes and therefore this is okay or not okay, because all brains and all screens are different. And so one kid can watch, 20 minutes of, I don't know, Paw Patrol, and they're going to be bouncing off the walls because for whatever reason, that's just a show that's really stimulating for them. And somebody else can sit and watch, an hour and a half of something and they'll be completely fine. And so if you have a kid that is the first kid and after 20 minutes, you're like, oh my God, it's not even half an hour. This is supposed to be an okay amount. This is how they're acting. We're right back to that something's wrong, I'm wrong, they're bad place. As opposed to, what is this telling me? What's something we could do differently? Could we try a different show? Could we try maybe having some physical movement before or after, see if that makes a difference? Just puts us more in a place of being curious to figure out, again, how do I make this work for me? What is my need? How do I make it work for us? And not to rattle on too long, but I saw one thing that I think you found interesting was a particular study, or there are a couple of them, that was done with a very large number of teens and tweens. One was in the UK and one was in the US. And these were studies involving 50,000 kids or 100,000 kids. And they were really trying to find what they call the Goldilocks amount of time.
Yes, this was fascinating.
So it's the amount of time where, benefit starts to wane, right? We are in that just right amount. And before that might still be okay. But after that, we're going to start seeing some negative impacts, particularly when it comes to behavior, for example. And what they found, I can't remember all the specific numbers, but what they found in general was that the Goldilocks number tended to be around, I think it was an hour and 40 minutes a day, something around an hour and a half a day. But if you looked at certain types of screens, for computers or TV, it was much higher than that. It was closer to 3 hours a day before you started seeing some negative impacts. And even for things like smartphones, it was over an hour a day. And what I found so interesting is that they looked at both statistical significance, but also what they called minimally important difference, which was when you would actually notice it subjectively as a caregiver. So instead of just seeing statistical significance, it was okay, how much would a kid have to be on a screen for their adult at home to actually notice this is having a impact on you regularly? And they found that amount was, I think it was over 4.5 hours a day on screens.
Yeah. Before caregivers were like, okay, this is too much.
Right.
And the fact that the statistically significant findings for the minutia of what the researcher is looking at is so different from what you as a caregiver are going to actually be thrown by. That was really mind-blowing to me.
Right. And that doesn't mean, it doesn't mean that statistical significance isn't important necessarily, but, it is statistical significance, right? We're talking about real minutia, and that doesn't always mean that you will notice any difference in your actual life. And of course, some people are going to hear this and go, but I don't want my kid on a screen for 4.5 hours. Sure, that's completely reasonable. And if your kid is having a hard time after an hour, still reasonable, still important. And that's why we can think less about how many minutes has it been exactly and more, what am I noticing? Because if I'm coming back to the need and you're like, okay, I have a meeting and I need an hour, right? If you know, oh, I cannot have them use their iPad for an hour because they tend to become a dysregulated mess in 25 minutes. That's much more useful information than, well, it says they're allowed to have an hour of screen time per day, so this should be fine because it's an hour.
Right.
It sets you up for more success.
And if you know your kid can handle the hour fine and can in fact handle more fine, it doesn't mean that, well, you had an hour of screen time while I was in a meeting, so now we can't watch a show together later to relax together. Like,
exactly.
You don't have to take away and being that granular with the math of the screens. You can be like, yeah, we needed an extra hour for this meeting and we'll still be able to watch our show later. Because that's what I notice with my kids is if I start to try to like take away from some other screen time, then it's like, oh God, wait, but that's the routine I'm used to. You can't change it. And that's fair.
Yes, absolutely. And I would feel that way too, right? If someone were giving me something extra because it was a convenience to them, but then later was like, oh, well, I have to take that from somewhere, but didn't tell me that. I would be like, excuse me.
Yeah, that's weird.
That's not how that works, right?
Yeah.
This was a favor to you, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I didn't interrupt your meeting. You're welcome, Mom. Where the time anxiety does tend to kick in, though, is that so often it's hard for kids to transition off screens. And so then parents think, well, it was too much time or the screen is bad. And again, this is one of the very powerful reframings of your work. So walk us through why just because a kid is having a hard time getting off screens doesn't mean it was too much and it doesn't mean that screens are evil.
So an example I use many times that you can, tweak to be whatever thing would come up for your kid is you think about, I think especially when kids are in that sort of toddler 3-4 age. My kid was 3 and 4 during COVID, so it was like a particularly heightened time to have a 3 or 4-year-old.
Yeah, sure was.
Yeah. Looking back, I'm like, wow, that was hard. Stack the deck on that one.
My younger one was 2, so yeah, 2 and 3. Yeah,
not easy either. So everyone can think back to whatever the sort of like go-to difficulty thing was. Like for us, we had a period of time where like transitioning to and from like the bathtub was very hard.
Yeah.
Getting into it was hard, but then getting out of it was hard.
Yep. Mm-hmm. They don't ever want to get in and then they never want to leave.
Never want to get out, right? So that was really tough for like probably months off and on. Some days would be fine, some days would not be fine. And if I were to, in those moments when my kid was really struggling to get out of the bathtub, right? Imagine how it would sound if I was like, well, it's the bathtub's fault, right? Like it's the bath's fault that they are having such a hard time because of the bubbles and it smells too good and I've made it too appealing and the water's too warm. Like, I mean, I sound unhinged, right? Like,
we're going to stop bathing.
Right, exactly. And we would not say, well, we can't have baths anymore, right? Or when we go to the fun playground and it's really hard to leave the fun playground, we don't blame the playground. Right. When we're in the grocery store and they don't want to leave wherever we are, we don't blame the grocery store. And we also don't stop taking them to the grocery store. We don't stop going to playgrounds. We don't stop having baths. Instead, we make different decisions, right? We try different things. We start a timer, we have a different transition, we talk about it beforehand, we strategize, we try things.
Mm-hmm. We give hey, we're leaving in a few minutes so they're not caught off guard. And
exactly.
Out.
Exactly. We talk about it, hey, last time it was really hard to leave here. We kind of let them know ahead of time, or we race them to the car. We find some way to make it more fun, to make the transition easier, right? We get creative because we know that, hey, they're going to have to leave the grocery store. They're going to have to take baths in a reasonable amount of time as they grow up into their lives. We recognize the skill that's happening underneath it. And I think with screens, we don't always see those underlying skills because we see it as this sort of superfluous thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not needed. It's not necessary. Well, neither is going to a playground technically, right?
Right.
A lot of what we do is not technically required, but the skill underneath that is still there. And so when they are struggling with something like ending screen time, is it really the screen or is it's hard to stop doing something fun, right? It's hard to stop in the middle of something. It's hard to stop if you have been playing for 20 minutes and you've lost every single race and you don't want to stop when you've just felt like you've lost over and over again, right?
You want one more shot to win.
You want one more shot, right? If I were, at the gym and I had thought I would be lifting 25-pound weights and instead I've only been able to do 20, I would be annoyed if I couldn't try to do one more set before I had to leave, right? And people are going to think, well, but screens are so much different than those things. Yes, a screen is designed differently than a playground or than, a free weight set. But we are going to have kids who are navigating a technological and digital world that we are going to kind of struggle to imagine, right? We're seeing glimpses of it, but it's going to be different than what we're experiencing now. And we want our kids to be able to navigate that with success. And that comes back to seeing the skills underneath. And so when they're struggling with something like that, taking the screen out of it and asking yourself, how would I handle this if it were anything else? How would I handle this if it were they're struggling to leave a friend's house?
Yes,
right?
ending play dates is always,
What would I do? I probably wouldn't blame the friend, and I wouldn't blame their house, and I wouldn't blame their toys.
We're never seeing that child
right.
again.
We can't come back to their house ever again, right? I would validate and I would tell them it's hard, and I would still tell them we're ending, and we would talk about strategies to make it easier next time, and we would get curious and try something. And we would be showing our kids that, hey, it's okay to have a hard time doing that thing. It's okay to have feelings about it. And we're still going to do it. We're still going to end that thing. A big part of the middle of the book is what I call the ABCs of screen time, which is really that most of the time, the things that we are struggling with when it comes to screens actually boil down to one of three things, these ABCs. It's either access, which could be time or when they're having it or how much, behavior, which you're kind of bringing up here, and content, what's on the screen, what they're playing, what they have access to. And so sometimes we might think that the problem we're seeing in front of us is a behavior problem, right? I told them to put the screen away. They're not putting the screen away. That's a behavior problem. But sometimes it actually could be because it's an access issue, right? It's more time than they can really handle at that given moment. Or it could be content because it's content that makes it harder to start and stop. So a big part of the middle of the book is really figuring out, how do I know what problem I'm even really dealing with here? And then what are some potential things that I can do about it to try to problem solve, try to make changes and see if this helps. And if it helps, great, keep it. And if not, I can get curious and try something else. And so a lot of it is strategies to try and ways to kind of, backwards engineer what might be going on to figure out how to make it work for you, how to make it better.
It's so helpful to feel like, okay, there's always one more thing I can tweak and adjust versus taking this it's all a failure, we have to throw it out, that kind of all or nothing thinking that really is never productive. The reason I think it's so helpful that you draw that parallel with the bath or the play date is it reminds us that there are some kids for whom transitions are just always very difficult, across the board. And so you're not just seeing a screen time problem. You're being reminded, my kid is really building skills around transitions. We don't have them yet. We hope we will have them at some point. But this is actually an opportunity to work on that as opposed to, this is creating a problem. No, we can actually practice some of these transition skills.
And I really like coming back to the skill because if we're thinking of it as a skill, then we're probably more likely to tell our kids that it's a skill too. Because if we're just thinking of it as it's a screen, it's a screen's fault, then we might not say those literal words to our kid, but we might say it's always so hard to turn off the TV, right? We're talking about it as if it's this sort of amorphous, it's only about the television or it's only about the iPad. And we're missing the part of making it clear to our kids that, hey, this is a skill that you're working on. And we work on this skill in these different ways.
I did some good repair with my kids after reading your book because I was definitely falling into the trap of talking about screen addiction. And I think I thought I was saying to them, it's not your fault. The screens are programmed to be bad for us in this way. So I thought I was at least not blaming them, but being we need less screens because they're so dangerous. But then I read your book and I was oh, that's not helpful either. No. And I did have one of my kids saying am I bad because I want to watch screens all the time? And I was oh, we've gone, that's too concrete and scary. And again, to draw the parallel with diet culture, it's just telling kids sugar is bad. And then they think they're bad because they like sugar. So I did do some repair. I was like, I read this book and now I've learned that that was not right. And they were like, oh, okay. So we're healing in my house from that. So thank you.
Well, you're very welcome, and I'm glad you hear that. But yeah, I mean, I think about those parallels with food all the time because sometimes it just helps me think like, wait, would I be wanting to send this message about food
Right.
or exercise
Yes.
or whatever? And if the answer is no, then how can I kind of tweak it so that I'm sending a message I'd be okay with applying to other things? And
Yeah.
I like being able to make those parallels with my kid and say like, hey, remember how we talked about like in my household right now, we're practicing flexibility. Flexibility is a skill that we're working on in so many parts of our lives. And when I say we, I do mean we, me,
Yeah.
everybody is
Parents
working
can
on
use
this.
more flexibility for sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so like when those moments are coming up, I'm trying to say like, hey, like what skill is this right now? Who's having to be flexible right now? Flexible can be a good thing, right? We might be flexible by saying yes to eating dinner on the couch and watching a TV show. That's flexibility. Flexibility isn't just adjust your plans to be more convenient to me, child, so that I can go do something, right, as an adult. And coming back to those skills so they can see, oh, okay, this isn't actually just about screens. This applies to every part of my life or these different parts of my life. And if I'm working on it here, oh, wow, it feels easier over there. And so they can see that this applies throughout their life and kind of feel more of that buy-in of like, oh, I'm getting better at that, or that was easier, or that was harder.
Yes.
We want them to see that across the board.
Oh my God, absolutely. Let's talk about screens and neurodivergency a little bit. So I have 2 kids. One is neurodivergent. And I can both see how screens are wonderful for them. At the end of a school day, when they come home and they're really depleted, like screen time is the thing they need to like just rest and, kind of regulate. And they love the world building games, which gives them this whole world to control and explore. And there's like so much there that's wonderful. And they definitely struggle more than their sibling with this transition piece, with getting off it. One kid will naturally put down the iPad at some point and go outside for a bit, and the other kid will not. And it kind of creates more anxiety I think, for parents. And when we see like this kid both needs the screen in ways that maybe we're not totally comfortable with, but need to get comfortable with, and then struggles with the transition piece. So how do you think about this question differently with neurodivergence? Or is it really the same thing? You're just having to drill in differently.
I think it is ultimately the same thing that we're having to think about, but it certainly is going to feel more heightened. And I think especially for certain aspects of neurodivergence, especially, I think it feels really heightened because some of the ways that they might be discussed, particularly online, when it comes to how they relate to technology. I think about like ADHD. So we'll see that a lot, where I'll see many things online about like, oh, kids with ADHD should never be on a screen. They should never be on a device because they're so dopamine seeking. And I have to just say that I find that to be such an ableist framing. It really grinds my gears, so to speak. Like it just really gets under my skin because really, especially talking about something like ADHD, we're talking about a dopamine deficient brain. And I don't think that we would be having that same conversation about like someone needing insulin. Right?
Right.
Like we wouldn't be saying like, oh yeah, nope, they can't take that insulin. They're just seeking that.
They're just craving that insulin. They need to stay alive.
To stay alive, right? But, a kid seeking a thing that they are somehow deficient in, that's not like some sort of like defiant behavior, right?
No, it's a pretty adaptive strategy.
Absolutely it is. And I think, again, if we're coming back to the sort of skill building and the idea that we want our kids to thrive in their future world, we want them to also know that nobody's brain is good or bad, right? There's not a good brain or a bad brain. All brains are going to have things that are easier or harder, and it's about learning the brain that you're in and what works or doesn't work for the brain that you're in. And all brains are different, right? Neurotypical brains and neurodivergent brains within those categories are obviously going to be vastly different. Right. What works for one won't work for another. And being able to figure out what works for them instead of just, oh, well, because you have this kind of brain, you shouldn't ever do this thing.
Yeah.
That's going to set them up for more success. But I think it's great that you mentioned both how a screen can be so regulating, particularly for neurodivergent brains, and then the double-edged sword of that is that then you have to stop, right?
The transition off back into the world. Yeah.
So it comes from a problem-solving place, I think, of finding, what is the pain point, right? If the pain point is a transition, what is it really coming from? Is it coming from the executive function piece of, I don't know how to find a place to stop? So I have talked about this in quite a bit of content on Instagram before, and I believe it comes up in the book as well, is that a lot of, particularly people with ADHD, they often like games that are more open-ended. So they might like something like a Minecraft or an Animal Crossing or The Sims, where you can sort of like hyper-focus and deep dive into something with like real depth. But what's difficult about that is that, if I play Mario Kart, the level ends. It's a very obvious ending.
Right. And you can say like one more level and we're done. Yeah.
Exactly. Like we've reached the end of the championship. I'm on the podium. I quit now. Right.
Yeah.
But there's a never ending series of tasks with a more open-ended game. And especially if I'm like in my hyper focus zone, right? I can just be thinking like, well, then I can do this and this and this and this and this, right? And I'm adding on to my list. And the last thing I want to do in that moment is get pulled out of it when I'm really feeling like I'm in the zone. So if that's the kind of transition that's difficult, that is less about games and more about how do I stop in the middle of a project? Because that's essentially what that is. And that would apply if I'm at school and I'm in the middle of an essay and we're finishing it up tomorrow. Or I'm, trying to decorate a cake and we're trying to walk out the door and I have to stop what I'm doing and come back later. So one of the tricks that I have found really helpful is to basically ask the question of like, how will you know when you're done? Or like, how will you know you're at a stopping point? What would a stopping point be today? And getting them to sort of even visualize it or say it out loud so that they can think about, oh, here's how I basically break down a giant task into smaller pieces, because that's essentially what that is.
That's a great tip to ask, when will you be done?
Or how will you know when you're done? Or sometimes with my kiddo, if it's like we have X minutes, like we have 5 minutes, it's like, okay, you have 5 minutes. What is the last thing you're going to do today? Because then it's concrete in terms of like, I'm not asking the last thing and it will take you half an hour, right? We have 5 minutes. What's the last thing you're wrapping up? What are you going to do? And then if it's someone who's like very focused in this world and they're very into that world, if that is the last thing that they're doing and we've said like, hey, wrap up, you got 5-10 minutes, right? Then that can also be our transition out of it, is that then they're turning it off and the very first thing we're saying to them is, so what was that last thing you were doing?
Oh, that's nice.
Then they're telling it to us. And then we can get curious. We can ask questions. We can get a little into their world to help them transition out of their world. And that doesn't mean that we have to understand what they're telling us, frankly. It doesn't mean we have to like know all the nuance, but showing that interest, I think is also really, really important, because then we are showing them, it's not us versus the screen. We're not opposing the screen like it's the enemy or something. And we're showing them, hey, I can tell you're interested in this. So I'm interested in it because you are. Like, I care about you, so I want to know more.
And they can invite you into their world, which with neurodivergent kids, we're asking them to be part of the larger world all the time. And how nice that we can meet them where they are a little more.
Absolutely. The other thing I would say is that something I think people don't always realize, especially if they don't play games as much or if they are not neurodivergent and playing games, is they might miss that video games actually are extremely well accommodated worlds in terms of accommodating neurodivergence. So thinking about something like ADHD, to go back to that example, it's like, okay, some really common, classroom accommodations for ADHD, from the educator perspective, the accommodations I see a lot are like frequent check-ins, having a checklist, breaking down a large task into smaller chunks, objectives, having a visual organizer. Well, I think about a video game and it's like, okay, if I want to know what I have available to me, I can press the pause menu and see my inventory at any time. If I want to know what I should be doing because I have forgotten, I can look at a menu and see like, what's my objective right now? Or I can bring up the map and it will show me where I'm supposed to be going. If I start to like deviate from what I'm supposed to be doing, the game will often be like, hey, don't forget, you're supposed to be going over there, right? It'll get me back on task. If I'm trying to do something like, make a potion that has 8 ingredients, it'll list them all out for me and it will check them off as I go so I can visually see how I'm achieving this task. It does a lot of that accommodation for me. And those accommodations are not as common in the real world.
Totally not.
Or at least not as easily achieved. And so a lot of neurodivergent kids will sort of succeed easily in these game worlds. And we might think it's just, because it's addicting or the algorithm, or it's just because they love it. But there's often these structural design differences that actually make it more accessible, like from an accessibility perspective. And if we notice, wow, they have no problem knowing what to do when they're playing Zelda because they just keep checking their objective list all the time or whatever, that's great information.
Right. Then how can we do that?
Exactly. And then we can go to them and say, hey, I noticed you seem to check your inventory a lot when you're playing that game. How do we make it so that when you look in your closet, you can just as easily see what shirts you own, right? Whatever the thing may be. So that we're showing them, hey, bring that into the rest of your world. That works for you here. Let's make it work for you elsewhere. Instead of thinking of it as a reason they're obsessed with screens and now we resent the screens for that, bring that in so that it can benefit the rest of their lives.
I mean, as always, I'm now like, okay, that just reframed something very important for me. You just have such a helpful way of helping us divest from the guilt and the shame and actually look at this in a positive way and an empowering way for us and our kids. And I'm just so grateful for it. It really is a game changer for me.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so glad to hear that it was helpful and empowering for you. And I just hope that it can be that for others as well.
So Ash, do you have some butter for us today?
So one of my butters is my family and I have been lucky enough to spend quite a lot of time in Japan. And one of the wonderful things about Japan is they have a very huge bike culture. I think people think of like the Netherlands or something as bike central, but Japan kind of rivals them. And they have a particular kind of bike that you cannot get in the United States that is what's called a mamachari, which is like a portmanteau of like mom and chariot. And it's sort of like a cargo bike, but they are constructed a little differently and have some features that I love. And so when I've been in Japan, we are on those bikes. I'm always like, I love this kind of bike. I want this kind of bike for me forever. And my recent butter has been trying to find something like that I can have in my day-to-day life. And I found something recently and got a lovely step-through bike on Facebook Marketplace. And
that's so cool. Oh, how exciting to find it on Marketplace too.
Oh, yes. Having a bike that like I actually enjoy riding. I had like my old bike from being like a teenager and it just was not functional. And I was like, this is not fun. And now having one that I enjoy, I'm like, oh, yes, I feel like a kid again. It's lovely.
That's so cool. That's a great butter. My butter is something both my kids and my pets and I are all really enjoying. Ooh. I'm going to drop a link in the chat for you. It is called a floof. Ooh. And it is basically a human-sized dog bed that I found on Etsy. It's like lined with fake fur.
Oh my God. I'm looking at it right now.
Isn't it like hilarious?
Wow. I'm so glad you sent a picture because that is not what I was picturing.
You can't describe it. I will have a picture in the transcript. I can't describe it accurately. It's like a cross between a human-sized dog bed and like a shopping bag, sort of.
Yes. It kind of, yes. Wow. It's like a hot tub of.
Yes, it's like a hot tub but no water. You just like sit in it. It's basically like a large, they call it a cuddle cave. I don't understand how to explain it, but it's the floof is what we call it. And it's in our family room. And it's not inexpensive, but it does basically replace a chair. So like if you think of it as a furniture purchase, there's always at least a cat or a dog sleeping in it. Frequently a child is in it. My boyfriend likes to be in it. Everyone gravitates towards it. And you can like put pillows in it or a blanket. Neurodivergent people in particular really love it because I think it provides a lot of like sensory feedback and it's very enclosed and cozy. It's great for like the day we're having today where we're like having a very laid back, watch as much screen as you want kind of day. And I've got one kid bundled into the floof with a bunch of blankets and her iPad and she's so happy right now.
Oh my gosh. I have to say also the colors they have chosen on the like model in the picture. It's like sort of a tan kind of color. And it kind of looks like the person is sitting in a giant pita, which I also love. It's great.
That's what it is. It's like a giant pita, but soft and cozy.
Yes,
That's really what it is. It's like being in a pita pocket. And I'm sure there's like less expensive versions. Like this was like $300 something. So it is an investment, but they're handmade by some delightful person in the Netherlands. Whenever we have play dates, there's always like 2 or 3 kids like snuggled up in it together.
Aww.
There's something extremely addictive about it. I don't know. I don't really know how to explain why it's great, but it's great.
Oh, that is lovely.
All right. We'll tell everyone. Obviously, everyone needs to go to their bookstore and get Power On, get their copy. Where else can we find you, Ash? How can we support your work?
You can find me on Instagram at @thegamereducator. And I also cross-post my Instagram posts to Substack. And I'm on Substack at The Gamer Educator as well. So it's like all the same content, just that way you're getting it in your inbox without having to go to Instagram. So if that's something that you are trying to maybe move away from, you can get it via Substack. And my book, Power On, Managing Screen Time to Benefit the Whole Family, is available starting August 26th is when it fully releases. And before that is available for pre-order. Otherwise, you can get it where you get books.
Amazing. Thank you so much. This was really great.
Thank you so much for having me back.
Thanks so much for listening to Burnt Toast. If you'd like to support the show, please subscribe for free in your podcast player and tell a friend about this episode. And leave us a rating or review in your podcast player. That really helps the show grow and helps us find new listeners. You can also consider a paid subscription to the Burnt Toast newsletter. It's just $7 a month, gets you behind most of the paywalls, and gets you a ton of free perks. There's different membership options you can check out. Click the link in your episode description or go to virginiasolsmith.substack.com. The Burnt Toast podcast is produced and hosted by me, Virginia Solsmith, and Corinne Fay. You can follow me on Instagram at @the_Solsmith. You can follow Corinne at SellTradePlus, an Instagram account where you can buy and sell plus-size clothing. And subscribe to Corinne's newsletter, Big Undies, at bigundies.substack.com. The Burnt Toast logo is by Deanna Lowe. Our theme music is by Faraday. And Tommy Heron is our audio engineer. Thanks for listening and supporting anti-diet, body liberation journalism.